we get started? You ready? Cool. Hey everybody, we are excited to have you all here with us tonight, and we're going to talk about making bubbles. It sounds like a fun kid thing to do, but we're going to do it in our adult world. So I'm Michael Munson. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and again, I'm really happy that you're all here with us tonight. We're going to start out in a kind of a presentation mode, so the three of us plus our ASL interpreter, so Derek Weinhardt and Carolyn Wazlowski, and I will all be kind of on screen for the first part, and then we'll open things up a little bit later when we have more discussion. So let me take care of a couple of pieces of housekeeping before we get started. The first is that I'd like to thank our funder, and one of these days I'm not going to have to read it off the screen. So we are in partnership with Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin's Inclusion Health Clinic, and we are funded by the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment with the Medical College of Wisconsin. So we're excited to have this string of programming that is geared towards COVID-19, but really about helping all of us stay healthier, both emotionally as well as physically. So we are recording today, so if that changes your desire to verbally share, just know that we're recording, and if there's anything that you would like us to snip out of the recording, just let me know afterwards, and I would be happy to do so. So for right now, the way that folks can interact with us is through raising your hand. So if folks can find that, can we practice the raise hand? Excellent. Excellent, perfect. And then the other way is through the chat feature. And so I think almost everybody has made some kind of interaction, but can we respond to the question, how about what is one of the things that you like about seeing someone in your life, so someone that you like in your life, that you enjoy doing face-to-face? So what is something that you enjoy doing face-to-face with somebody in your life that you like? So I'm seeing walking together, talking, watching movies or TV shows together, talking over coffee or tea, playing games. Excellent. So there's lots of different ways that we can experiencing friends' laughs. Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of different ways that we like to engage with each other. So we're going to talk tonight about how we might be creating a bubble. So some folks that are kind of in our inner circle that we may see in person, we may not. So we may define our bubbles a little differently, but we'll talk about kind of how we come to those decisions, whether we're conscious about them or not conscious about them, what might help us be healthier emotionally if we include some people or don't include some people in our bubbles, and how we can communicate with those in our bubbles and those outside of our bubbles about why we're making the choices that we are, so that we have good communication and hopefully less hurt feelings within our friendship circles. So again, we're going to kind of do a little bit of presentation, and Carolyn's going to start us off kind of to frame the topic for tonight, and then we'll do a little bit of sharing.
Hey y'all, Carolyn Wazlowski, she, her, hers. I work with the Froedtert and the Medical College Health Inclusion Center in social services support. So that's just a little bit of background. So talking about bubbles, what is this that all of a sudden we are kind of putting a toe in the water about possibly interacting with people, possibly face-to-face? What does that look like all of a sudden? The reason we want to approach this topic is that we have been in very strict stay-at-home orders for quite some time, and people are starting to feel that fatigue. Zoom isn't always cutting it for folks, and there are real serious benefits that we're going to discuss around possibly starting to approach conversations that may be healthy for us, and what that might look like for building our own personal bubble. Excuse me. What I think is important that you'll see as overarching themes are conversations around choice and very intentional approach to what is important for us, how meeting our needs, and what we will gain from these interactions and what we can offer others. And it's really a negotiation that's going to take place that you'll see what that might be like. I think we'll talk a bit about, at times, those of us who are interacting in the world out of what's called essential work or essential duties or tasks. Some folks have to get groceries or things of the like. And so I think for me, I'll touch on that a little bit later about what that looks like and how that fits into my conversations with folks who I've included in my bubble, and perhaps others will too. I think that we will talk a lot about risk and whether that's personal risk in terms of health conditions, risk of those of others, because that's what we're negotiating here, of those in our space that we're looking at, and if, when, how we start to conceptualize what this might look like, who that might be, why. And I'm super excited to talk about this with y'all and get everyone else's perspective, because it's an ongoing situation. I think we are in this for a very long time. Studies are showing that, unfortunately, the cases are not dissipating, at least in the state of Wisconsin. We're watching where we are, all of us now. And we are here to buckle in, I think. And so as much as we can get by, I think is really important to acknowledge that needs are real. Human interaction is real, and it's very important, and how we can do that in the safest way possible for each one of us and those we want to include in our bubbles. Again, I might reference later a study that is looking at that bubbles are effective if they are agreed upon and there's guidelines set, and that they are successful in abating the psychological, social, and even economic impacts of what lockdown, quote unquote, has been for folks. So forgive me, I hope that's not too loud. And so, yeah, I'm again really excited to talk with both Caleb and Michael about their experiences and have a really rich conversation about different ways we can all go about this. And I hope to learn from y'all too.
Well, thanks for setting it up for us. And so, like, when we were kind of thinking about tonight, I kept on thinking about, I look at the world through show tunes and through music sometimes. So I was thinking about Barbra Streisand and the People Who Need People song. So some of us are introverted and we don't really like people, but some of us are extroverted and some of us are like a blend of those things. So when we talk about, kind of our bubbles and who's in our life, I'm going to keep on having that music going in my head about, people who need people. And I was reminded about, I worked with a therapist a long time ago who said that, all people are like herd animals, like kind of like cows, that we all like to kind of be in a herd together, even if we're introverted, that we get something out of being in a group together, whether that's a physical group together or just kind of knowing that we're emotionally connected with other people. So I think that that's one of the kind of the touch points that we're going to play off of a little bit tonight. Carolyn mentioned this, but we need to have people in our lives. We need to have some social contact and possibly face-to-face contact to help us feel more, emotionally centered. It may help us feel more physically well. It might help us feel more spiritually well if spirituality is a part of our lives. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about how, we might have increased immune systems if we have like more happiness in our lives or more touch in our lives. So some of those can actually help our health, even though we might be potentially exposing ourselves to COVID. So, I mean, there's like these things that we're all going to weigh. And I think that a big part of our discussion tonight is going to be about how do we individually weigh those risks and weigh those needs that we have, because all of us have different needs for physical connection or face-to-face connection. So hopefully by the end of tonight, we'll all have kind of a different view of like what our own needs are and how we might want to continue to get those needs met. So I think those are kind of like the frameworks of what we're going to talk about tonight. And I think we're going to just kind of go around our little square. And I think, Carolyn, you're going to start us, and then I'll go next, and then Caleb is going to go last. And just kind of sharing what our bubbles are, what our personal bubbles are, and how we kind of reached those decisions that we did about what we're doing, and maybe how even they're evolving over time. Do you want to get us started?
Yeah, happy to. What's coming to mind immediately, you were talking about introverts and extroverts, and I like, sometimes I'm an extroverted introvert, most of the time, but at times an introverted extrovert. So I definitely had started to feel a very big weight in being really disconnected with folks. I did my best to maintain connection in all the ways that we've talked about, through text, video, phone. And I started to notice that other folks were sharing similar strain, right? Emotional and social, and just a psychological weight for a lot of us. And I felt very strongly connected to a friend of mine who has a partner and 2 children, and her mother lives with her. So prior to COVID, we had been spending a lot of our time together. That was a best friend, if you will. So it started to become natural as we were more distant for longer, having conversations that were deepening our relationship already from a distance, and sharing this new kind of what has been termed communal trauma for some folks, right? Unfortunately. So what became natural was conversations around, hey, I'm really hurting in this way. I'm wondering if we can kind of inch towards maybe possibly a very distant kind of walk or something. So it started was a very light, kind of low risk idea. That was kind of just was born of a very visceral need to like be amongst others. And I think most folks can, well, maybe not most folks, some folks, it was a very deep stirring. We had a Zoom meeting with, she, as I mentioned, lives with her mother who's older, and we needed to consider her health risks if we were going to kind of engage in distance interactions. And then her 2 young children, what they might bring. They had not been seeing any others. And so I was out of work and not seeing others. And so the risk was very low. We had made very deliberate conversations in that I can agree that I won't see others. And if I do consider seeing others, that's something I will converse with you about, what your comfort level is, and vice versa. Some of the things that we thought about were, and this is what I've seen with others in conversations with others who are building their pods or bubbles. So the term pod is coming up a lot too, a blending of larger families as opposed to myself, who I reside alone, and therefore is just my own bubble. Like having folks that might add complementary things to your life that you might not have. And my friend had a myriad of family members that I could engage with and have that child space and that child interaction, and outdoor space. And so I think considering those types of benefits for yourself are important as well. We were open about that maybe I can come hang in your backyard and sort of inch into this. We had conversations around how they go grocery shopping. Can we sort of share that responsibility? If one person is going in the week, can maybe you do it for everyone? And that will continue to lower our risk as a group collectively. I think what is, and something that continues to be a conversation as I myself have returned to the workplace, has been, how are those feelings of every single one of those family members? Again, the older woman in our bubble has, you know, she and I, although she's not my primary friendship in this relationship, we have a much more open communication than previously, which has been really eye-opening in terms of like her anxieties and concerns around me visiting them. And I've come to see that while there was a foundation of trust that had to be there in order to start these conversations, to even consider interacting with folks in person, that it's, our friendship is so much more rich, and I've kind of, rather than a bubble, have built a greater family sense, and it's been really rewarding. That all being said, they've got a family member that's returning from travel across the States. And so I'm faced with the decision, do I want to continue to engage with them for a period of time if she's coming from unknown places, if you will, and carrying unknown risk with her? This is a decision that that I have to make for myself and my well-being. And we've been talking about it openly, and they understand, and there's mutual respect that has been really moving to speak openly on an emotional level with folks that you wouldn't necessarily have. Of, again, so very intentional. That I think it's important to remember that this is while a verbal contract, that you can change that can be renegotiated at any time, and that's vital to keeping that as a bylaw, if you will, in that contract, that I can revoke this at any time. And that's kind of where we've started. We're starting to talk about, as we return to work, what that might look like, and and kind of backing off a little bit now to see how things will look. But that's just one example of how I've built my bubble. Very, very much a lot of communication that we still continue to do distantly while we kind of develop things as they go. So it's not a static situation, meaning that it's always changing, and we're always kind of presenting that to each other. And each of us understanding that while our decisions are most important in our own health and our space are what's most sacred and we have control over, we also have that mutual concern for each other. So that's how I've kind of done it, and that's just one way to go about it. But not everyone has the same living situation, so what that might look like for you, Michael, or you, Caleb, I'm interested in seeing what that is.
Caleb, why don't I go next, since you live with more people than I do, so we're moving from I live alone for Carolyn, and then I live with one person, and then Caleb, you've got a little bit of a broader network. So Carolyn, thank you for sharing that, because I think that you've really shared a lot of, I think, what Caleb and I are both going to share as well, about some of the intentionality of the choices that we're all making, and kind of how do we get to those choices, and who's in our sphere. So I do live with somebody. I live with my partner, and we're both introverts. So in a lot of ways, the early period was like, oh, this is really nice. I really like this. We're not going anywhere. We don't have to talk to anybody. We had to talk to people, but we didn't have to see anybody. And it was really quite nice, I think, for a while. And then I think there does become that like, I miss seeing, the barista. I miss seeing the person that I used to like have even casual contact with, let alone people that were closer into my own circle. Um, I'm also really, I benefit from being able to work from home. So my partner works from home. I work from home. I've made some changes from that though, because like I used to work, I have a condo, which is where I tended to work, and my partner worked at our house. And I stopped going between my house and my condo office as one way to just reduce the risk. I didn't have to go in an elevator then at my condo. I didn't have to go in the garage. I literally didn't have to come into contact with people. So, we really kind of hunkered down, and we've been hunkered down for the entire time since things really closed. So we've had a lot of physical distancing from basically everybody else, and there's a couple of exceptions in that. And one of the things, my partner and I have really good communication, and we talk a lot about the decisions that we're making, and even things like we've both had a couple of medical appointments that were in person, for example, and we've been able to do playful and kind reminders of like, okay, well, we're going to wear a mask, of course. And when we get home, as soon as we get home, we're going to wash our hands again, even if we have hand sanitizer in the car. Like, so some of those things have helped, well, at least me, because I'm probably more hyper about it, feel better about one of us going out into the world and coming back into our safer bubble. We've also done, telehealth things for the mandatory things. And then if we've engaged with our friends, most of our friends are not local anyway. So we would have been engaging by email or by Zoom or some other remote way before this all started. So there's a couple of exceptions that are in my life and in my bubble. And one of them is that we have a kid. We've got a 26-year-old kid, so he doesn't live in our house. He's a 26-year-old kid that has not yet decided that masking is a really cool thing yet. So, he brings a level of risk that's substantial, I think, because he's not engaging in hand hygiene at the level that I would feel best, and he's not wearing masks. The kind of good thing about it is that he was laid off from his job, so he's been staying at home a lot. So he's engaging with his dog and his cats and his snake and his other reptiles that I don't even know what their names are. But that's who he's interacting with, and then he's going to the corner store, and having some interactions with folks that way. So, we see him, every couple of weeks or something like that, and they tend to be brief interactions, but I'm really aware of the fact that I'm making a choice to see my kid because I love my kid. I can bring him a mask every time I see him, but I haven't gotten to the point where I've said to him, like, you have to wear this mask if you're going to be in my space. And I'm aware of the risk that brings. And I've thought about this a lot in terms of when he was growing up. If we were going in the car anywhere, we didn't leave the driveway unless everybody had their seatbelts on. And so I've started to think about masks in the same way, and I haven't yet gotten to that point where I've been willing or able to say to him, I'm not going to see you if you don't start wearing masks when you're in public. So that's one of the points that I feel is a pretty high risk, or at least variable risk that's not really known. And, I don't know where he goes all the time, and I don't know how much exposure he has. So that's one person that is in our bubble. The other person who is very, very remote and I don't see very often at all is my former partner. So that's somebody that I've known for 34 years, and somebody who we have a special relationship with in some ways. And I've done some things like I do their laundry. So that it reduces their risk of having to do communal laundry in their building. But how we've done it is we both mask up. They bring their laundry to the garage. They empty out their car, put it in the garage. I take it in. So, we're not engaging in a lot of like in the same room space breathing. And if we're breathing with each other, we're quite a bit away, and we both have masks on. And that feels really comfortable for both of us. And they're probably a lot more stringent than even I am about precautions. So that is the other person that's really in the sphere. So, unlike you, Carolyn, you know, my partner and I have not really had a lot of discussions about who else is going to be in that circle, partially because we're introverted, partially because we don't have a lot of social interactions with people locally. There are a couple of folks that I would like to consider bringing into my circle. One is a friend, and we haven't done this before COVID, but we've wanted to go for a walk on the beach or in a park. And we've talked about, well, what does that look like? And can we stay an arm's length away? And can we do that and both feel comfortable? And I think that, this person and I feel comfortable with that, and we just haven't put that into play. And I will obviously have that lengthy discussion with my partner, and we've kind of already had that discussion. So that's another one person that I'd like to bring in. And then the other is really kind of about medical need, but also about a personal need. I really miss being touched, and I miss having body work regularly. So I need to figure out myself first, and then with my partner, how do I feel about seeing a body worker, and what is their office like, and what are their protocols, and how can I get some of my both touch for touch's sake needs met, as well as therapeutic body work needs met. So that's like another open door that I'm not sure where we're going to end up. So those are some of the things, and I'm just looking at my notes. I think one of the things that I didn't mention is that, like, I think part of why we pulled back so tightly was that we saw a lot of people not I don't want to say following the rules, but a lot of people were going out and doing things that we viewed as high risk. So we were kind of like trying to counterbalance, like, we're going to pull back as much as we can so that we're not going to negatively influence the spread at all. And that still feels really, really important to me. So yeah, I think that that's kind of where we're at with things. Caleb, where are you?
Sure. So, when quarantine started, I was living on campus, in college, and then classes went online. So I moved back home, and was living with my family, and we were very strictly, isolating, and, it's not perfect. But we were, I think, as close as you can be to like completely quarantining. We were having groceries delivered, not even going to the store, and we didn't have any. It was our family pod, and then we had a little bit of like overlap because of my mom seeing her partner who lived somewhere else. But otherwise, we didn't have anybody else coming in like for socializing in our immediate like face-to-face bubble. And then, going into the summer, my previous plans weren't, going to work out anymore. So I decided to move back near my school, to a different state, and live in a house with other people who are also in school. So that's where I am now, and I'm currently living with 3 other people, and we'll have 3 more moving in the fall. So a lot of people at the moment, and we all, I think, have different levels of exposure, and are aware of different areas of life where we might be more at risk. I work from home. One of my other roommates works from home, and we don't have a whole lot of outside contact for work. But 2 of my roommates do work out of the home, and they tell us about the precautions they're taking, and that their workplaces are taking. But there's that level of exposure coming in. And then we also have some agreements, because we're kind of in this network of houses of people in college who would love to be together and socialize, but finding ways to mitigate risks with doing that. We don't have many people that we've like fully brought in and decided we're going to like share exposure, and like they can hang out in the house. I don't really think at the moment we have anybody who's at that level in our bubble. We have a couple of people that we see from other houses face to face, but we've agreed that we will do all of that outside as much as we can, and to try to maintain distancing when we can. Sometimes it's difficult if we're going on a walk together, things like that, but we have agreed not to let people in the house without a mask on, and then only for like to use the bathroom when we're spending time outside. So that's kind of what we're doing, and each of us only has a couple of people that we see face to face. Like I personally have two friends essentially that I ever spend time with outside, but they both are living in houses with roommates. So we know that like we can't control um, every risk that might be coming in. And especially with other people's roommates, knowing that other people are working and other people have totally separate people that are in their bubble. So we, try to communicate a lot about how we're minimizing those risks when we do see other people, and limiting the people that we are seeing. Um, and we just recently had a new conversation, because when we all moved in together, we had a conversation about what we're doing around COVID and risks, and minimizing those. And then we recently had a new one, just to make sure everybody was still on the same page. Another thing that's come up is like dating and seeing people that we don't even know in the first place. And that's really tricky. And I think I feel a little bit differently about that than my roommates, because we still have that agreement about being outside and distancing for any of those things. And I really value being able to like make agreements as a house. So, personally, like there's somebody I wanted to see recently. So we all sat down and I was like, how do you feel about if we go to a park and we sit 6 feet apart and eat food? And my housemates agreed that that would be okay. Some of my housemates have just kind of announced, I'm going to do something with this person, and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of invitation for discussion about it, which can be really difficult. But I've been trying to express how important it is to me to like have a space for discussion about any risk that we're bringing into each other. And then the other thing that we're doing is trying to get tested if there's a reason to believe that we've been at like increased risk. So I got tested recently because I had a sore throat, and I didn't really think I was seriously sick, but I thought it's a good enough excuse to do it and just know. So that was good. And one of my roommates visited his family in Montana recently and just came back. So he also got tested before coming back. And that's not super accessible. Like it's been difficult to get tests as frequently as like might be good. But I think that's one way that we're trying to be really careful, and knowing that if somebody in the house tests positive, that we'll just completely quarantine and not even have those minimal face-to-face interactions outside of the house. So it's been tricky to navigate, and we're trying to avoid risks as much as we can. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Caleb, I'm wondering if I can ask you a question, because you've had kind of like two different experiences. Like when you moved home, you had the experience with your family that you've known for a long time. And you obviously haven't known your roommates for your entire life, I'm presuming. How has it been different to like negotiate those two different places? Because you've negotiated in both ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different environment, and it was a huge adjustment for me to move out here. And even just the moving process, I took a train out and then was having to, go to different stores. And like, especially when I first moved in, I knew there were going to be several risks in that process. And I expected that my housemates and I would communicate about quarantining and isolating. But I honestly like came in expecting a little bit more of like a strict, that we're just isolating together and not having anybody else come in. So it was an adjustment for me, knowing that I can't control for what my housemates are going to do. And we can communicate about it, and we can come to agreements that, like, to me and to other people feel reasonable. And maybe like ideally I would prefer to have less exposure, or like fewer people that we're seeing. But I know like I really would love to see my friend Sarah. And I, to be able to do that and to spend time outside, it is a compromise then to, my housemates also have those people that they really want to have in their social life. So it's been an adjustment to kind of communicate about that with different people. And Michael, like you were saying, like with my family, I think we were really open about communicating about that stuff because there's a lot of trust there. Um, and coming into this situation, it's building trust while we're in the middle of this pandemic. So it's been a process for sure and still is. And I think having those ongoing conversations and kind of the openness to, I think we need to reevaluate our rules and like, let's talk about them again or come up with something different, is really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think this is like, maybe a really good place for us to like start having some dialogue around, that communication piece. I think is the hardest. Like, we need to figure out what we feel comfortable doing. But, that's probably the easiest piece of it. But like, how do we start to have conversations with people when we may never have had these kind of conversations before because we just got up and went to the park with somebody, or we went and, had coffee with them. So I'm curious, like, for either of you, like how have you started to have those conversations? And you both touched on them some.
Yeah, I think for me, if I may, they came very naturally. There are, in terms of folks coming from the same sort of strained situations, and what's coming to mind and thinking about starting those conversations, there is some fear in saying to folks in this kind of climate, like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe meeting a friend, or maybe you might want to meet up, and then possibly saying no, that they're not willing to do that. You have to put yourself out there to some degree, and understand that they're making that decision for themselves and possibly for you as well. They know their risk the best in what they're bringing to the table. Another thing, and I know this isn't exactly what you had asked, but what is resounding in my mind, I work in sexual health and the idea of harm reduction, right? And lowered risk. We know that there have been a lot of comparisons in building bubbles within the COVID-19 pandemic to abstinence or harm reduction in terms of the sexual model and HIV/AIDS, that all or none does not work. It creates a higher risk and higher exposure. So we do know that. It's just resounding for me. So I'm trying to get it out there so I can move on. But we know that negotiating risks and taking that lower risk and is still a protective practice. And that there are benefits from that. It's an agreement that we have with another, and it's a fine dance. Yeah, I don't know.
Could you say more about that? Because I mean, like, I think that if I heard you correctly, what you said was that when it's an all or nothing, that it actually increases the risk. Is that what you said?
So in studies around sexual encounters, so if teaching all abstinence, so like absolutely no sex, it increases, folks are less likely to use protective practices or safer sex practices while they're like not necessarily educated, or that's been kind of what the comparison has been in some research recently. So, like in terms of, so some folks in my life, I know that they don't wear masks, and that they, while are open to, they invite you over to hang out in the backyard, that there's still risk there for me. You go out in the world, that there's a negotiation that is always taking place. I don't know the other folks you hang out with, I'm sorry. But whereas other close friends, I think the social contract and the discussion is very vital in building that foundation and continuing to build on that. But they're not easy conversations. There's some folks, it's a very hot situation out there.
And Caleb, you talked about, the hardness of those conversations too. And I'm wondering if you have more to say about kind of, how it feels to have those conversations, or who initiates those conversations, and how that plays out, because it is hard.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. And I think it can feel very vulnerable, especially like early on. I remember feeling like I was the only one who had certain concerns about like certain activities, um, or like certain choices. And I didn't want to be the person, the downer who was coming in and saying, this doesn't seem safe. But, and in those situations, I think it did feel that way, but like as we've gone on, I've had more conversations where I'm noticing that like, no, my housemates do value the same things, and we may just communicate about those things differently, um, and at different times, and like maybe one-on-one conversations are easier to have, when we're talking about like our personal feelings and concerns versus like a house meeting where then you feel very put on the spot to share like I feel uncomfortable with this. So having different conversations with people, and also for me it's been a process of trusting, because I can't, I don't have control, of every single person's choices in like the things that they do when they go to the grocery store, like go out, to sit outside and have food with somebody. So I like have had to develop a certain amount of trust, in that, and also like communicating that I would like for us to have this trusting relationship. Um, so yeah, it's really difficult. Those are the feelings I have about it.
Right. And it is really difficult. And, I was thinking that, like, I think that, of the three of us that are sharing, I probably have the closest bubble of people. And, I certainly have really good communication and trust with my partner. And yet, like, they were going to go to the doctor. They were supposed to like go to an in-person visit. And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable with that, and it's like, that was really hard for me to say, even though like it shouldn't be hard to say, but it was hard because it was different. Like, I've never had to say, well, I don't want you to go see your doctor. I mean, that just felt like it was like like I was asking too much, but it was a really simple ask. And my partner was like, yeah, not a big deal. And they did a telemedicine visit and it was just fine. But it's hard to make that first ask when we're not used to having those specific conversations. Yeah. Other things that either of you would like to share about like kind of that process of communication, the building trust, the not knowing? I mean, Caleb, you talked a little bit about like the lack of control of like what other people are doing. And
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've learned is that it helps me to hear what other people are planning on doing as precautions, even if I like do have trust that, they're not going to like a party or something, but to hear like, this is how many people I'm going to interact with, and that we're going to be outside and wear masks or something. Like just to hear that helps me to feel more at ease, even if like I'm not personally being asked if like it's okay for them to go do that thing. So I think knowing that about myself is helpful for like asking for what I need in those situations. Yeah, I don't know if that answers what you were saying.
And that's really interesting too. Like, we have to kind of like know what our own personal communication styles are and what our own emotional needs are. So it's like, what do we need to hear? How do we need to hear it? As well as what does that other person or people need to hear? So how does it go both ways?
Yeah, just to kind of continue the idea of trust, I think that I'm in a unique position in that I'm the odd person out of my tiny bubble that I've kind of latched onto. And so I've had to I've had to prove myself, so to speak, and I've had to really be more transparent, or the most transparent, with my folks who I'm engaging with. And so it's really interesting in, you might be on level ground with your roommates, but engaging in kind of developing relationships with different people in this household that I wouldn't have had at all, I think is is challenging, and the roles that everyone plays are unique. And so building trust from the ground up due to these circumstances has been a trip. But I will say that I feel all around more at ease, and knowing that I've got an outlet, and that that I have that extra support, be it, be it another location, a physical location that I can go to that is safe, that I know of, or just a different mind space in amongst others. And so I can't say enough how important it's been to me, and it's helped me to have additional conversations around safety. So it really just brings home how that I'm being more cautious for others as well. And sharing that idea with others, I think reinforces that for myself.
Yeah, and this is, it reminds me that like we're living in this world that is so different than what we've ever experienced before. So like having these conversations is totally new. Problem solving and thinking of ways that like how we're going to be together. Like Caleb, when you were talking about like, well, you engage with people outside, but they don't come in the house, but they can come in the house and they wear a mask if they need to use the bathroom, but then they go back, did we ever have those kind of things before? Like, like, of course you can use our bathroom, right? It's like, it's one of those things that we're having to like kind of come up with new rules of how we're friendly with our friends as well as friendly with our, people that might be newer folks into our circle. So I'm wondering if either of you have made different choices other than what you've already shared about how you're engaging with those people that are in that inner circle. Like, do you do things differently now than you would never would have done before, prior to COVID?
I think I'm just forced outside more. I don't know if this answers your question, but I've done a lot more outdoor activities, like that are distant, even though they're folks that I can share a meal with, that we've agreed and we're in a bubble together. We still tend to keep as much distance as possible. It's forced me outside. It's forced me to have different relationships with different folks I wouldn't have otherwise engaged in. And it's changed my friendships with other people that I had previously been close with that I've opted not to engage with. So it's changed relationships across the board for me. Time will tell what else really has come of this.
And I would say similarly, I've had to be more creative with, like, if I do want to spend time with somebody, but who's not like in my household, so I want to maintain some distance and try to, and be outside, finding ways to do that. Things that we can do, like going for a walk or something, or hanging out in the backyard. So definitely getting creative with that kind of thing. And it's also been difficult to decide, like, not to do certain things and not to see certain people because it doesn't feel safe. I would love to have a big dinner party and have everybody come over, and, especially when other people move out here for school in the fall, I think it's going to be even more difficult to make those choices to not do things that would feel like great and under normal circumstances. But yeah, difficult decisions.
And Caleb, I know you mentioned dating, or, but the potential of dating, whether it's you or somebody else that's in your household. I mean, how does that, I'm not asking you specifically how does that look, but like, dating has got to look totally different, now than it did, 6 months ago. And, how do we have those conversations? And this is a rhetorical question, unless if you want to share anything about it, but it's just, I think that it adds a different layer of like, it's a human need, right? We need to have contact with people, most of us, most of the time. And how do we get some of those needs met if we might not be partnered, or if we're polyamorous or whatever it is? How do we get those touch needs or those feel good needs met? and and there's no singular answer to those things, but it's a new world that we're negotiating those pieces on top of, we might have to negotiate our transness, we might have to negotiate, say, for sex practices, and now we have to negotiate this other piece on top of it, and that can feel really daunting, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Most of my experience with dating has been through the lens of being really concerned about what my roommates are doing around dating. And we've made some agreements about that too. And it's kind of similar to like other, like our friendship interactions, but that like if the first time that you meet with somebody, because it could be a one-time thing and then you'll never talk again, is to see each other outside and distanced if possible, like to take as many precautions as you can. And then after that, if it's something that is more ongoing, then maybe that's somebody we just bring into the bubble and discuss what their exposures are at that point. How it's been.
And I mean, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot with it, but it's like, that's right. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you negotiate that when you have other people living in your space with you, or how do you negotiate your own risks? So it's a tough thing. It's a really tough thing. I'm looking at the notes that we kind of made beforehand, and I think that all of us talked about the constant need to kind of, well, not maybe not the constant, but like a need to reassess our agreements with ourselves, what we feel comfortable with, and with the people that are in our pod or our bubble. And I'm wondering if either of you would share, like, well, how often does that happen? And how often does it happen? How does it happen? What are your thought processes about that when you're evaluating?
For me, it is so regular at this point that it's ingrained in all of the conversation. Yeah, it's ongoing on a regular day-to-day basis, I would say, certainly, in kind of reporting back what your whereabouts have been and where you're going. And thankfully, we're at a point that it's comfortable and safe, and that it's expected but not pressuring, and it's quite cohesive. So it's it's just a casual and passing, like an up to date now, and that's been great. Whereas other kind of potential bubbles I've been dancing around or discussing, because there's some potentially on the horizon that negotiations are in place. Those feel much more forced and stressful at this point, in that you kind of feel like, I'm not a parent, but a parent checking in, like, and that tells me that maybe we're not on the same page for those, for more intimate interactions for folks. So, but what I find successful and effective for us is our daily check-in, when we say, what's your high low today? That's kind of all part of it, what else you did. So
I think it's interesting. I mean, with that, I was thinking about, like, with the people that are in my life, and they're not local, so I don't really have to think about it in a real way of like interacting with them. But like, I'm not sure that I have very many folks that were on the same risk level. I think that I tend to be really cautious. I tend to be really risk averse, and so I think it would be really hard if folks did live, here in the same city, because it wouldn't be that I didn't trust them, but it's just, I know that they would be taking risks that I wouldn't be taking, and I would feel uncomfortable hanging out with them, because I would know that they were doing things that, it's not right or wrong what they're doing, but they're higher risk than I would prefer. And my only exception to that has been my kid. And that, again, is just, that's a conscious choice of knowing that, he's not necessarily doing what I would like him to do, but, he's my kid and I love him, and I need to see him because I have an emotional need to see him. So, yeah. What else should we talk about before, we can maybe open up and, let everybody else kind of go on video, and we can have a little bit of a dialogue? Are there other things that, you'd like to share that you feel are really important?
I think that I just want to reiterate that, I have personally felt concern in sharing with some others that perhaps like family members that I do have a bubble, right? Like there is some societal pressures that I personally feel that I want to say it's okay to have these groups if you're doing it in a consensual, intentional way that has benefit to you, and that is mutual, and it has done wonders for me. So I want to say that it's okay, if thoughtful. So I think that's very important.
And what you just said, it kind of reminds me of like, I've had people that I maybe I'm projecting what they're thinking, but we get our groceries delivered. We get our supplies, our household supplies delivered. And that is something that feels comfortable for us. And I've seen, maybe I haven't seen their faces, but I've kind of felt from other people like, why are you doing that? Like, just go to the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's not where I feel comfortable. And so I guess that's where kind of I start to feel friction with people like, oh, well, we're not on the same page. And it's okay. But it's just like, it's like how much of it is me kind of presuming what people are going to think, and how much it really is other people thinking, why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes back to like, we're living in this world that we haven't lived in before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not everybody, not everybody's approaching things the same way, and that's all okay.
Yeah.
But how do we, not make each other feel bad in the process of what our choices are?
Yeah, giving a lot more cushion and kindness to folks, I think, is pretty vital these days.
Yeah.
I think also it can be difficult not to get defensive, and maybe I'm interpreting this on the opposite side of like, if I ask one of my housemates, like, if you're, seeing this person, are you guys going to be outside, or are you going to wear a mask? Like, just because I would like to know. And I've had, one of them say something like, well, don't worry about it. Like, you can trust me, or like, I'm not going to a party, like, say something like that. And I totally hear the defensiveness and, wanting me to know that wanting me to know that they are going to be careful and that I should trust that. But then it becomes a barrier, I think, to communication. So that can probably come up the other way too, in terms of like, when people are like, well, why are you getting your groceries delivered, or things like that, where it, can feel like maybe an attack on just individual choices in how we're protecting ourselves and other people. So I think that can be really difficult, and I'm not sure how to handle it yet, but I've just noticed it.
And it reminds me too, like, Carolyn, you said that, like, sometimes it feels like you're like talking with a child, like, like you're checking in on people like all the time. And what you just said, Caleb, this kind of reminds me of that. Is like, if you say to somebody, well, hey, are you going to do X, Y, or Z? Does that feel to them like you're like treating them like they wouldn't do those things? Or is it for your own need? And it's, again, those are rhetorical questions, but I think that we're having those conversations and we're not used to having those conversations. Mm-hmm. So it can feel like we're having that like parent-child conversation, or I'm checking on you, even though we're not trying to do those things. So it may be perceived differently than our intentions behind things. I want to take a quick moment, because I know Caleb has to jump off at like 1 minute from now. So I just want to say thank you to Caleb before you have to go. And probably, is it food that's coming? I don't think I even want to know, right? Is it food?
No, it's lumber.
Okay, it's lumber. All right. So not food. Don't eat the lumber. So, but thank you for being here. And if it's okay with folks, we could just wrap up slowly. And if we extend and Caleb goes away, it's not personal. We don't. Carolyn, do you want to add any kind of like wrap up thoughts, or Caleb, do you want to before you flee?
I don't know that I have more to say beyond what we've talked about, but I've just really appreciated hearing how other people are navigating this. And I know that everybody's situation is slightly different, and a lot of people are finding ways to reduce the risks, and it's harm reduction in those situations. And so it's been really helpful for me to hear that, and also just thank you to everybody for being here.
Yeah, I mean, I would mirror that, Caleb, in that people are being more and more creative to meet their needs, and learning about themselves in unique ways, and learning about the relationships and how to interact with others in uncharted territory, if you will. So I think we will continue to learn more about ourselves as we negotiate and renegotiate, and keep ourselves centered in that manner. And keeping others at the forefront as well, I think, is vital. So I really appreciated everyone sharing.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks, Caleb. And I really appreciate this was a surprise to me. I mean, I was thinking about this session as being kind of more presentation and kind of pushing things out. And I really appreciate the deep level of sharing from folks. I think this is the best part of tonight. No offense to our first part, but it was, this is I think what makes us feel connected to each other, is when we can share stories and we can find those connections between, who has cancer and who's lonely and who's, in need of things, and how do we navigate that. So I really appreciate the folks that were able to be and willing to be vulnerable in sharing. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Carolyn, for spending your night with everybody. And we'll hopefully see you on Thursday. Bye. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.